Welcome to the Fitness Plus Technology Podcast for club owners, operators, and fitness professionals. Each week, host Bryan O'Rourke brings you an expert interview with a global influencer at the crossroads of fitness and technology. You gain the insights, tools, and inspiration you need to stay connected to the pulse for what matters most for your business in the age of exponential technologies.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to the podcast. I am your host, Bryan O'Rourke. Thank you so much for joining me today. We have another great guest who I am going to tell you about here in a moment in more detail. Leon Rudge, who's a great leader based in the UK. So we look forward to that chat, and I'll tell you more about it in a second. But before we get started on this 122nd podcast, and by the way, a shout out to all the members and contributors to the Fitness Industry Technology Council. We've been doing this for a number of years now, I think going on 4 years. We've had hundreds of thousands of downloads of these interviews, and I get so many really kind messages from different people like you listening, and they find the shows useful and beneficial, so thank you for that. And I hope you continue to listen. Look, as you know, there's some upcoming events that are starting to appear on the calendar. So I want to make sure that you check out the show notes for the IRSA convention in Dallas, which is scheduled for the 13th through the 15th of October. It's going to be a great show with hundreds of vendors and people from all over the world attending. Kudos to the team at IRSA and the board in the last year and the members for over a year and all that's gone on. Please join me there with our colleagues. For our European friends, the Smart Summit in Munich is November 17th through the 19th. Another great event. Our friend Ralph, of course, and Natalie involved with that with IRSA. So a great event. So check that out. Couple of other little things coming up in a couple of weeks on August 17th. We have the Expert Series sponsored by eGem, and the subject is data a four-letter word? We're going to talk about opportunities and challenges in applying data in the fitness business or in fitness businesses. And we're going to have Alan Leach, who's the new chair of IRSA, longtime friend and colleague, CEO of Westwood Clubs. We'll also have Lyle Godden from Modus on the call as well, particularly about data and application of marketing and other things. Of course, Dana Milkey and myself. So register now. It's free. I hope you attend. We're also working on at FITSE a digital certification for fitness. We're going to be getting that done here in the next number of months, and I hope you would be on the lookout for that. So anyway, now that we've done kind of our catch up on general industry things that are going on at events, let's move our focus to Leon. For those that know Leon, of course, he heads up or is one of the leaders of digital experience at Life Fitness. He's a director of digital experience. You may have enjoyed some of his controversial posts over the last year. We talk about one of them, particularly the 8 technologies that could replace your trainer and what to do about it. That'll be in the show notes, so you may want to take a peek at that. He and I in this interview are going to talk about that. We're going to talk about innovation. We're going to talk about some of the challenges of that innovation. What are the opportunities? And Leon has some great insights on that. So without further ado, let's welcome our guest, Leon Rudge. Well, hello, listeners. Thanks for joining us. As I was saying in the intro, Leon Rudge, he and I have been conferring for many years back and forth. Perhaps you read his LinkedIn articles, which are always a little controversial and provocative. Leon is joining us. Whereabouts are you, Bristol, or where are you today?
Yeah, Bristol, Bryan, southwest of England. The mighty Bristol.
Well, listen, thanks for joining us on this fine English afternoon on a Tuesday. How have you been?
Very good, thank you. Very good. The weather's actually changing, but it's good.
That is good. And Leon, we were chatting before the start of the podcast about a number of things. I always find talking with you to be very illuminating. So I'm sure our listeners will feel the same. And I said, Leon, let's talk about your most recent controversial post, about trainers, the 8 technologies that could replace trainers. So, before we get into those details, when you bring up subjects like this, and there have been more of these than this one, which is your most recent, posted on June 25th on LinkedIn. I will put the link in the show notes for everybody. What kind of reactions do you get? I mean, what's the kind of, I know people feel differently, Leon, on these issues, but generally speaking, can you tell me the reaction to this kind of a post? Are there like 1, 2, or 3 different camps of thought when you bring this up? I mean, how do people view that?
Yeah, I think there is 3. There's the kind of, there's the, the respondents that absolutely believe in it and think it's something that could happen, or will happen, sorry. And then there's the complete opposite to that, which think it's absolutely nuts and insane thinking. But there are the people that sit in the middle, and that and think it is provocative, and start to think about how it could be true. So and that's the idea, really, to obviously appeal to everyone to say, well, look, I'm not these technologies exist. Somebody's going to pull them together. So that's the idea, is just to expose that.
And it's nothing, when you say something like that, we were talking in the beginning, before we got on, about how some readers of this kind of content, they almost take an affront to it, like it's an attack on them, or some people will view it as an either or proposition, like, well, you're either going to be a cyborg or you're going to be a human person, and never shall the twain meet. Is that a fair kind of assessment about how some folks view these kind of discussions on tech?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you a short aside. Actually, I went to a wedding, which was an accountant, and the bride was an accountant, and I got talking to a whole bunch of accountants sat in front of me, and I brought up the lovely subject of how that industry will be replaced by technology and machine learning, that the accounting industry just didn't believe it, and I was like, this absolutely will happen. And I recently went to we have the Royal Mint in the UK, where we strike our coins, and I went on a tour. It's a fascinating tour of the Royal Mint, and I got to the end of the tour, and the lovely young lady said, has anyone got any questions? And I said, yeah, what are you going to do when we don't use currency? She said, don't be silly. She thought I was being so it happens in every industry, not just fitness, but we've got to realize that some of these service worker roles will be replaced by technology, and I guess it's our role to understand where the human fits in that and just evolve that, right? And I always talk about it, Bryan, as is the one thing that we have as a sector over technology is people, places, and equipment. Mm-hmm. And we got to figure out where that sits in this, and how those things play nicely together. The 8 technologies sketch is, I could have got deeper on that, and it's that was a pretty high level. Yeah, so it happens a lot, but some people just, and I think that the challenge with humans is we always think of the future with a frame of the past.
Right.
But I was talking to somebody on the phone this morning as my car was parking itself, and I suddenly just sat there, and I drove past the parking spot and thought, I can't fit in there. And my car said, yeah, you can. So I hit the buttons and my car parked itself, and I said, and they're roughly my age. They're in their early 20s, Bryan, but nobody can see. Yep. And I said to them, when we were kids, could you imagine being in a car where everything's, steering itself and the wheels moving and it's braking and changing gear? So these things happen. And I think, you don't even need to drive your car anymore.
No, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So these things happen. So I think it's our role, and we talk about innovation in fitness, but I think it's our role to look, very far into the future, not just the near future. And Bryan, you alluded to that, as we were talking earlier. We've got to look further afield, and I don't think we have to react to that, but we've definitely got to have a lens on it.
Yeah, and one of the things I've seen, and I've had the pleasure of working in other industry spaces as well, and one of the things that you see is this notion that, well, what's happening over here won't apply to our industry because our industry is special. People don't understand it. and it's just, that's a very self-centered view of the world because there are so many examples of how technology and business models have been evolved to improve experience for the customer user and drop cost and create totally new revenue models that didn't exist before. I mean, if you think about something like streaming music and what that has become, it's redefined the entire music and arguably the entertainment business. Or, I mean, you think about these basic things, whether it's a car, we'll look at car washes. I mean, the automation of car washes, it used to be you had to wash your own car or someone would have to do it. Now you go on a machine, it's done. Or, I mean, there's so many examples of this kind of thing that are real. And you're correct, Leon. I mean, it's not that you're doing away with humans altogether. In the analogy of accountancy, which is a great one, you look at accountancy and there's so much effort in accountancy that has to do with very repetitive tasks like bank reconciliations or these basic things that completely are automated. So what that enables is people with greater proficiencies at creativity, human connection, all these other soft skill sets that can deliver value in other ways. And the same is going to happen with trainers. I mean, because and people don't like to listen. No disparaging trainers. I know a lot of them personally, and great people in general. But in many cases, and please, no offense, if you go to a fitness floor, a lot of times you're going to see a trainer counting reps, looking at their phone. Is that delivering value?
Yeah, and again, that's been something that's talked about forever. I've watched many a presentation where trainers are teaching other trainers, and that's the number one thing they talk about is the rep counting, and I'm very surprised that still happens today, and I think that I think the relationship delivers the value in personal training and trainers and gym instructors, and I guess that's the only communication that they feel that they can have during the exercise, and that's okay. But I think that's the role of technology in that space is enabling and enhancing the relationship. I find with what I noticed with training, and it's same as you, Bryan. I know some fantastic trainers, and this is said with all respect, but I see trainers looking to over complex movement with gym inductions to prove out their skills because they're fantastic. And really, most members of a club, and certainly new members, probably don't need much more than just basic compound movements. Right. What is the role of technology in that? But if you look at the role of, if anything, but also when you look at technology, the role of technology in that, in basic movement in the home without a trainer is immense. There's a huge opportunity there. So I think it's enhancing the relationship, but also what does that mean within the across the whole gym floor, and I think the power of it is being able to personalize membership and personalized training en masse. If I think of a large operator that's got 5, 10, 15,000 members, to be able to deliver service to those that amount of members in and have 15,000 different programs, I think is the power of technology. The rep counting, I don't know if I'm hoping somebody doesn't write an app that sits there counting reps. I hope that's not audio coaching.
Yeah, and it's a great example of what you kind of alluded to before when we were talking, which is this notion too that digital is this thing over on the side that kind of people talk about in a kind of, in many times, very loose conceptual terms. And you know, when it comes to innovation, it's really thinking through how to apply it in ways that make the most sense to improve experience, personalizing that experience, creating convenience, you know, eliminating friction and transaction, improving that experience, and reducing cost, right? So the only way that, you know, most organizations can achieve breakthroughs on that is really discarding their assumptions about how that should be done and starting kind of from scratch a little bit. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think so. You know, I think one of the difficulties is, you know, as you become more experienced in the commercial world, you know, you continue to think of it as you did, you know, when you first started out in business. And I went through, you know, quite a big change personally, and I know how difficult that is, and I can empathize with it. But you know, if you sit with an 18-year-old developer, you get a completely different mindset, and it's wonderful. You know, you put a mixed set of you know, demography in a room and ask questions, it gets even better. And I think that's the, you know, the you know, that's kind of you know, part of innovation for me is how do we ideate like that. So and I think what really got me thinking about it, Bryan, is I watched I like telling a story, as you know. I watched a TV show it was a UK TV show, and it was called something like Teenage Internet Millionaires or something like that. And you know, one of the first scenes in that was a couple of young guys, must have been 13, 14, in a bedroom talking to YouTube. And this was some years ago, maybe 15 years ago, like early days YouTube. And I remember looking at it and scoffing and saying, that is not a business. And then I was like, well, hang on a sec, these guys are millionaires, so it is a business. And that, you know, they were selling mugs and t-shirts from their bedroom. And that was at the point I thought, hang on a minute, something's overtaken me, and I didn't realize it happened. So it's very easy to think again with a frame of the past and think, you know, and you know, and to use the references and the learnings that you had in your early days in, you know, when you first came into business. But there's so much going on out there. You've definitely got to keep learning.
Yeah.
You know, and as we talked about, Bryan, when you get into things, you know, like democratizing currencies, NFTs,
Right.
you know, the token world, you just think it absolutely blows your mind what's happening out there and what's being enabled with technology. And I guess bringing that back to the, you know, the 8 technologies that could replace your personal trainer, that's exactly what that was. You know, I think if you go to Facebook and go into your settings, on the first page of your settings, I think the second to last option is, what do you want to happen when you pass away?
Right.
You know, and that's because our digital self outlives our physical self. And when you start looking at things like digital resurrection, you know, I'll take this 8 technologies to another level, where I believe that my physical body may move, it may stop working, but my physical self can, you know, my digital self can last forever. And I believe there'll come a time when you can put a pair of glasses on and have a conversation with somebody that's passed, and you know, they would be lifelike.
Well, that
Same.
exists. That exists now. There's an
Right.
app that
Yeah.
that can do that. Actually, it was created by an engineer that whose good friend was killed, and he took all of her texts over years.
Yeah.
Yep, and replicated it. It's called Replica,
Yeah.
and you can actually converse with Replica. So listeners will put that in the show notes. Replica. I think it's
Yeah.
REPLIKA, right?
And it's a sore subject, right? And it's, you know, digital resurrection, as you said, is a thing, Bryan. And we're in early days of feeding data in.
Right.
But if you put these technologies together, you know, with things like LiDAR and, you know, holography, there's absolutely, you know, that this will happen. And I think if you know, you have to reach into that into that far-fetched world, to bring it back and say, well, hang on, what does that look like in 5 years? And we forget that what's the iPhone, 12 years now, 12 years old.
It's 2007.
Yeah,
So
so
it's more like 15 years.
13, 14. So
15,
you
yeah.
think how far we've come in just 14 years, right? So so you think, and Bryan, the speed of change accelerates and exponentially. So what's in the next 5?
Yeah, and
So
Christensen talks about that in the Innovators Dilemma because,
yeah,
a lot of businesses in the gym health club industry, they need to heed that. In Christensen's Innovators Dilemma, he talks about how large outstanding firms can fail by doing everything right
yeah,
because they have a certain mindset based on the past, as you pointed out, and
yeah,
it's hard for legacy operators. It's very hard. It's kind of like changing the tires on a car going 50 kilometers down the road at the same time. It's very hard to do. So I think a lot of the challenge is that, which is why new entrants have an easier time in certain respects because they're not burdened by it, right?
absolutely. And I think about things like my favorite story again, kind of towards that subject, Bryan, is is Microsoft's what they call the dark decade, which is where they had servers and software and service software and enterprise software, which was their core business and most profitable. And Steve Ballmer was just really rinsing that and keeping that alive because it was that profitable. Meanwhile, Google and Amazon were building out the cloud, and Microsoft were really starting to ail. And it wasn't until we had a change in leadership that they went to the cloud and modernized that things started to change in terms of revenue. So it's I just think and I think you talked about, Bryan. I just think I think there's lots of operators now doing a fantastic job. Like I'm sometimes I sit on calls with operators and think, wow, this is awesome what you're doing. So with some operators are making a move, some aren't.
Yeah.
But I think the number one thing that I would is to have that innovation thinking in your gym. The
Yeah.
objects.
Yeah. Especially when you look at an example like you bring up, you know, the idea of virtual reality, augmented reality. You can see with Facebook, I would argue because of the problems they're going to have with monetizing advertising in the coming years, but call their new strategy becoming the metaverse. You see them owning Oculus, but how many people, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to put on the Oculus Quest recently, but Supernatural is one of the apps, and I'm here to take, and listen, don't take this wrong, audience. I don't, again, this is not a criticism of people that are delivering fitness experiences now in older style ways, which is nothing wrong with that. I mean, we still have drive-in movie theaters in the United States, but if you were to get on Supernatural and experience that with a VR headset and Quest and realize that that technology, in the next 36 to 48 months is going to be light years ahead of where it is now, I think I would really encourage people to try to find someone that has a Quest to try it. Because when you start experiencing those things, that's when I start thinking people go, oh, wow. What do you think about that, Leon?
Yeah, it's one of those things, Bryan. You've got to see it to believe it, right? It really is. Like I said, if someone showed me a video of parking their car
Right.
10 years ago, I'd have gone, no way. But when you actually, see it, it's like, wow, I'm sat here and the car is driving itself. And I always remember my early development days back in the late 90s, a video that Microsoft made. And, they were some guy was running in the park and he grabbed the coffee and his watch came up with an appointment with the dentist and he spoke into it and it changed the appointment. And I remember as young developers, we were like, no way, wow. And within a decade it's here, and our children are wearing it. But yeah, so you, like you said, encourage someone to go and try virtual reality. It really is real, it really is virtual reality. And again, I won't get too far on this, but I believe, Bryan, that probably within the next decade, you and I can live in the same physical world, but live in a completely different virtual world.
Yeah, well, that's kind of happening now almost.
Right. Right.
And I noticed that you're a fan of Brian Solis. You've watched his stuff
Yeah.
before. You know, his book X,
Yes.
which talks about the experience business. You know, it really, you know, because when you talk about technology, as you've said before, it's really it's a tool to do things in completely different ways. And the reality is that, you know, member experience is the new marketing. You know, it's a battle for attention. And, you know, designing that experience is really the point of competitive differentiation. And so when you think about things like these tech trends that you outline and others, you know, really the ones that are going to do very well are ones that figure out how to create those things, putting all this together in a way that really distinguishes your service offering, right?
Yeah, I think, and I'm starting to see this with operators. You know, they realize there isn't one size fits all. They realize there isn't an out the box, and there never has been in any software, in any industry, in any, you know, any vertical providing any service. There's never been an out the box solution that's worked for anything.
Yeah.
And I think in fitness we've gone through a phase of um, just trying to reinvent the program cards and you know, and putting convenience in of class booking to create the operational efficiency, and that's fantastic. But you know, like you said, Brian, it's, you know, one of the big things when I talk to operators is, you know, the first thing I've got to do is understand what is the physical business model, and what is the current customer journeys, because you know, we don't come in and say, you know, get rid of all of that and put technology. And we're saying, well, what are you trying to create? And it goes back to that old saying, and you've heard it a million times, Brian, you know, don't start with the technology, start with the experience and work backwards. And there's never a truer phrase, because that's the point of uniqueness. And you know, if you can't differentiate if you're all using the same app, you know, and I think now, as I said, operators, especially post COVID, are now building ecosystems, not apps. They realize there's, as you alluded to it earlier, Brian, there's huge cost savings. You know, any repetitive task can be, so automation should be top of the agenda.
Right.
You know, digitizing or complementing the customer journey. And I think that the challenge to that is it's never ending.
Yep.
You know, once you think you know, it's a full iterative cycle, and it's going to require probably, you know, it's going to require people, and it's going to require investment. And in the final piece of that is, every time you know, we start to see now post COVID where I think a lot of operators, you know, just went into a crisis response and probably realized they were a little bit out of control with their own destiny. You know, we start to see these ecosystem diagrams now, and what I really see in that is the commonality. When you see one of those diagrams, I can pretty much guarantee there's a CTO or a CDO in role.
Yeah.
You know, so I think we'll see a little bit of a divide now, because you know, some people are watching and fast follow, fantastic, absolutely not the wrong thing to do, and some people are, you know, innovating and moving on and doing some fantastic things. And again, they're both valid strategies, but those that are sat back and doing nothing, I think probably need to move on, and you know, and actually just put a lens on it, because as you said, Brian, I think it's digital will be the point of differentiation.
Yeah, that I think that is true. I think also human capital. I mean, when it comes to the mindset and the culture of an organization, when you do deploy, you know, technology in the right way around experience. Now, you know, there are exceptions. You know, Amazon, I've yet to speak to anyone from Amazon, so, but their NPS score is in the 80s in the United States, and they, you know, they do what they say they're going to do. So, of course, behind the scenes, they have people. That's a whole other conversation about what some of those poor people have to do. But yeah, I think that you're right. And you know, by the way, kudos to Life, and by the way, shout out to Chris Clausen for all his support of URSA and the organization support of URSA. I'm a big fan of what you all do. But let's put that aside, and let's talk about some of the kind of friction points when it comes to doing these things for operators that are trying to walk down this path. I mean, you've talked about it for a while. It's a big challenge. It's the notion of interoperability, because when it comes to deploying technologies, the way that they can talk together better, and different players in the supply chain and different operators are trying to take different approaches. But the APIs are kind of a little clunky across the industry space, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it's definitely fragmented as well. I mean, you can have 10, 10 components in your ecosystem for argument's sake, and you've got 8 of those solid and 2 of those, 2 of those solid and eight of those that are clunky. And I think that does cause challenges if you're trying to fill a data lake and the APIs keep falling over. You're going to have huge gaps in your data, and if a machine's trying to learn, it's going to take longer because not too long, but it's going to struggle to get struggle if there's gaps in the data. So Life Fitness, as we've had the open strategy since 2012. So that's been fantastic. And as somebody in the technology and digital space, working with an ecosystems, that massively helps, because we genuinely, when we speak to operators, we're in the binary world. If you plug your equipment into the internet, we are then in the, we have fantastic equipment, and that will, keep going for decades. We know that. We've mastered manufacturing technology. Now it's when it's become smart connected, and there's this whole experience orbiting around that equipment is, what happens next. And we're in the binary world there. So, we can push and pull things, and, that makes it really exciting. The challenge with that is you have to have an industry that understands that. You've got to have a consumer that wants that.
Yep.
And you've got to, it becomes very difficult to find that pivot point between the two. So it is a pleasure though, Bryan. And what I really love, and we do this a lot, we put a number of different organizations around the table and just do, tech studies or, tech meetings where we'll say, right, where do we need to get to? And you've got 10 organizations in your ecosystem all talking and working.
Right. That's right. And many operators now, and many legacy operators and others, they're operating, 10, 12 different SaaS solutions. Yeah. They'll have APIs, but the way those APIs function are not ideal. It's clunky. It's hard to kind of make the leap of delivering all these things easily because of that.
Yeah, and I think also you get into this, who does the work?
Right.
So if you're building a custom solution, or connecting things to things, who does the work there? And because there will be work to be done, and it's who does that. And generally in a digital world, it falls down to whoever the pane of glass is, right? It's whoever's displaying the data. So there's some companies out there that have that burden every time. And it's the unfortunate thing about being the integrator. But for me, it's that's the hot topic at the moment, is in integration and partnership. And we talked about it, Bryan, with the through the FitC, the standards would be fantastic, because interoperability is going to be our biggest problem. If you look at healthcare, you can have the biggest blood stores on the planet, but if the operating theater the systems don't speak to the blood bank, it's pointless. So I think if standards could come into play, then it would, and everybody work to a kind of push pull standard, then it wouldn't always be down to the same culprits. You could develop your systems, and going back to the Amazon analogy, where Bezos says you can build anything, but make sure it can receive data and send data.
Right.
So you create open, then you start building systems of systems, and that's where it gets really exciting.
Yeah, and then you have to be aware of who your partners really are, because in the case of Amazon, you're doing a deal with the devil in certain respects.
100%.
And that gets down to who owns the data and what are they really trying to do with it. And that's, when you start talking about APIs and what you said, who does the work? And that's one of the problems of the Innovators Dilemma, isn't it? Because when you have an ecosystem of service providers that all are defining their view of standardization around an old paradigm, it's very hard to move to the new one. It would be kind of like talking about movie theaters and standards on the kind of film that sits in projectors versus standards on, digital digital rights and the ability to stream content over the internet. They're very different things. One has to do with maintaining status quo. The other has to do with a whole set of discussions, right?
Yeah, and I know that's incredibly difficult.
Yeah,
if not impossible.
That's
And
right.
that's the challenge. It's, as you set out, Bryan, in the early days to, with standards, it's I don't, besides things like open banking, as we've in the UK, we have open banking. I'm not sure how that translates. It probably exists in most countries, but has a different name. And, but that you're working in a regulated world there. So, we can put governance and privacy and security in and things like that, but it's just, like you said, it's the desire to do it and the sharing of the consumer. So
that's right. And you think about things like blockchain or Ethereum with smart blockchain, where the whole idea of membership, payment, the nature of personal information, all these things they're going to be blown wide open, and it's a matter of time, right? I mean, but you have billing companies that are all set upon the old gateways. You have all these different disparate groups that are really set up on a 20-year ago paradigm, right? For the most part.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, and that's the problem. I just think is, things need to be updated, and, will there become a time where, you're, as a user, you've got your data, like you said, on the blockchain, and I'll give my data to whoever I want, whatever I want, or maybe I've got a fungible token and I'll sell you my data.
That's right.
So a non-fungible token, and I'll sell you my data, and and every time you resell that, I'll take a cut. So and it honestly, sometimes I sit down, Bryan, and I think, cool, where is this going? And I've got the privilege of working for some incredibly smart people as well. And so, there's a few people in live fitness that, we share these crazy things. I have a great team and some great colleagues, and we share these things in a small group. And I sit back sometimes and think, where is this going? And what's really interesting, if you start to speak to younger generations, it clicks quicker with them.
Oh yeah.
Because they live completely differently.
Yeah, and they're not burdened by the past as much.
Right. And I was saying this to my daughter recently. I said, I feel privileged to have been brought up in a pre-internet age.
Yeah.
My daughter doesn't know that. She doesn't know the pre-internet age, and it's a privilege, but also it's a curse when you're in a technology role.
Yeah, absolutely. So in wrapping up here, thanks again for the time, Leon. I always enjoy talking with you. And what kind of pearls of wisdom would you give to people when it comes to how, they should view this, their businesses, and, what should they be thinking about? Of course, there are a lot of different types of business models. You don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but if there were a few things that you'd emphasize to folks in the industry space, given your background and your role in life, what would some of those be, Leon?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because it's, as you said, it's quite broad. But I would definitely be forming, somebody who's got a responsibility, a role, or a team of people that are looking at innovation. I'd be tasking those to look in, other sectors, like certainly with like makers and founders, real, disruptive groups, and maybe just get into some of the tried and tested, or certainly some of the modern techniques of business model canvas, value proposition, and just start testing some ideas on paper, because anyone can do that. You don't have to be, and I always say to people, I know that Apple and the big techs have lots of money, Bryan, and lots of talent, and all the talent probably, in terms of the tech world, but they all start with a blank canvas, and they all start with innovation, and that all starts with an idea. And within our organizations, we've got some super smart people. So it would be, look inside, create that ideation, create some innovation, and set some time aside to do that, and just look in different spaces. It's really easy to look at automotive and look at But if you actually get under the skin of some of these young founders whose roles it is just to find a problem and disrupt it, completely different ways of thinking.
Yeah, that's good. And we'll put the show notes on what the business model canvas tool is with Strategizer and those folks, which we both talked about in the past, because it is a great tool to use to kind of think through this, because it is about how you view the world, right? And all journeys in that process of transformation, they start with a foundation and steps. Like, you have to start somewhere. And I agree, it's not about starting with the technology, it's about starting with the business model, right?
Yeah, and that's why I think, again, the canvas plays with this. Like, if I'm talking to an operator, and I say, let's go through this. If you sit with a business owner and they can't fill out the canvas in front of you there and then my first response is, I can't fix your digital business or design it or comment on it if you don't know your physical business.
Yes. And the truth, yeah, I'm sorry, I was going to say, and the truth is that, and this is quite widely published, you can go look at it, even in big businesses, successful businesses, about 12% of businesses even have a strategy. So anyway, keep going. I'm sorry, Leon.
No, that's exactly. It's a great tool for that, right, Bryan? And I think one of the best things about innovation is find time for it, because it's fun.
Yeah, that's good way of saying it.
So that for me is where it is innovation, and look at these makers, founders, these disruptors, because there's we think there's no more disrupting to be had, but there's a group of young techs out there that are disrupting everything, and they're doing it quickly, and they're not doing it for any other reason. They just love coding.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. Well, Leon, I want to thank you again. Of course, we've had our great exchanges on LinkedIn with a lot of other people. You write great content, and I encourage listeners that haven't already done so to follow Leon on LinkedIn and the different platforms. We'll have links in the show notes. Leon, it's just great to see you. I'm glad your family and you are well. I hear things are going well in the UK right now, so Godspeed, and I wish that trend continues for all of our friends over there. And it's just wonderful to see your face today and to visit and hear your wisdom.
Thanks, Bryan. Really appreciate the invite.
Take care. Hello, listeners. This is Bryan O'Rourke, and thanks so much for listening to the Fitness Plus Technology Podcast. The podcast is made possible by the Fitness Industry Technology Council, a consortium of global brands working together to enhance the adoption of technologies in the fitness space. Our company, Videri Ventures, which is invested in Vertimax, Montezuma, Gold's Gym Houston, Texas, and Fitness 24/7 Thailand, also underwrites the podcast, along with our service companies, Integris Advisors, Moon Mission Media, and others. Please feel free to share this podcast with your colleagues. And if I can be of any assistance to you, don't hesitate to reach out, bryanko'rourke@gmail.com, or find me on any of the major social networks. Have a great day, and thanks for listening.